The call came at 6 in the morning on a Thursday in February. I know it was a Thursday because I had my work bag already packed by the door, my travel mug on the counter, and a deposition scheduled for 9 that I had spent 11 days preparing for. I was standing at my kitchen window watching the neighbor's sprinklers run even though it had rained the night before, thinking about nothing in particular, when my phone lit up on the counter. My sister's name. I had not heard from Danielle in 4 months. Not since Thanksgiving, when she had announced at the table with the same casual brightness she used to order at restaurants that our parents had agreed to help her with a little investment opportunity. She had looked at me once when she said it, just once. The way people look at someone they have already decided does not matter. I let the phone ring twice before I picked up. Mara, her voice was measured, which meant she had rehearsed the opening. Danielle always rehearsed her openings. I need to ask you something and I need you to just listen before you say anything. I said nothing. I watched the sprinklers. She needed $50,000. She needed it in the form of a wire transfer, within the week, to a private account she would explain later. The investment had gone sideways. That was the word she used, sideways, as if money moved like weather and she needed a bridge. She was certain she could repay me within 6 months. 8 months at the most. She spoke for 4.5 minutes without stopping. When she finished, I set my travel mug in the sink and said I would think about it. You'll think about it, she repeated, and I could hear the surprise underneath the composure. She had expected yes, or she had expected a scene. She had not expected calm. I told her I would call her back by Friday. What Danielle did not know was that I had spent the last 14 months preparing for exactly this moment. I'm 36 years old. I am a family law attorney licensed in the state of Georgia. I own a 2-bedroom house on Pryor Street in Atlanta that I bought when I was 31, with a down payment I saved over 6 years while sharing a 1-bedroom apartment in Decatur with a woman named Felice who worked night shifts at Grady and who taught me, by example, that dignity does not require an audience. I did not grow up expecting to work for things. My parents, Roland and Cynthia Voss, were not wealthy, but they were generous in a way that had a direction. Generous toward Danielle. That is not a bitter observation. It is simply what I watched happen over the course of my childhood and early adulthood, with the kind of clarity that comes from being the one watching. Danielle is 4 years older than me. She is beautiful in the way that certain people are beautiful immediately, effortlessly, in a way that makes rooms rearrange themselves. She has always known this. She deployed it the way a surgeon deploys a scalpel, precisely, and without sentimentality. When Danielle went to the University of Georgia, my parents paid her tuition, her housing, her meal plan, and a monthly allowance of $900. When I graduated high school 2 years later, my father sat me down at the kitchen table in our house in Macon and explained, quietly and without cruelty, that they had less than they'd had before. That I was smart, that I would figure it out. I did not argue. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I went to Mercer on academic money. I waitressed at a diner on Riverside Drive 4 nights a week, and one weekend morning I graduated with honors and a student loan balance of $27,000, which I paid off over 6 years, one extra payment at a time. I did not go to Spain the summer after my second year of law school, though I had been invited on a trip with 3 friends, 2 of whom I am still close to. I could not afford it. I did not tell anyone except Felice. My grandmother on my father's side died the spring of my first year of law school. Her name was Iris. She left me the only thing she had of value, a small, round brooch, cameo-style, ivory background, the profile of a woman in pale blue that had belonged to her own mother. It was worth nothing to an appraiser. It was worth everything to me. I kept it in a ceramic dish on my dresser. Some mornings I picked it up before leaving the house. Not for luck. Just to remember that someone in my line had survived harder things than I was currently enduring. My parents sent Danielle $147,000 over the course of her adult life. I know this number precisely. I arrived at it over 14 months of careful, patient reconstruction, bank statements, tax records, a single afternoon in my parents' home office when they were at a birthday party and I was house-sitting their dog. I am getting ahead of myself. Danielle and I were close once. I want to be precise about that because nothing in what happened later would hurt the way it did if there had not been genuine love between us. First, when I was 8 and she was 12, she used to let me sleep in her room during thunderstorms. Not because I asked. She always came to get me, appearing at my door in the dark with her hair in a braid and a flashlight. She used to light our way down the hall, as if the 10 steps between my room and hers required a guide. She was kind in those years in the way that children are kind, without strategy, without audience. When I was in high school, she was already in college, and she called me every Sunday. We talked about books, about boys, about what we were going to do when we were older. She wanted to be in marketing. She had ideas. She was funny in a dry, precise way that I admired and tried to imitate for years. When our grandmother Iris died, it was Danielle who sat with me in the parking lot of the funeral home while I cried in a way I had not cried in front of anyone else. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said she knew you, that was all. But it was enough. Something shifted after I passed the bar. I cannot name the exact moment. It was not a confrontation or a declaration. It was a series of small adjustments, the kind that are each individually explainable and collectively devastating. She stopped calling on Sundays. Fine, adults are busy at family gatherings. She began redirecting conversations. If I mentioned a case, she mentioned a campaign she was running at work. If I mentioned my house, she mentioned that she was considering buying something with more character. Once, at my parents' anniversary dinner, she said something about how Mara's always been the serious one in a tone that made the table laugh and left me with nothing to respond to that would not make me look small. She did not invite me to her birthday dinner 2 years running. When I brought it up once, gently, she said she had kept it really small that year. I later saw photos on social media with 11 people at a restaurant downtown. These are not crimes. I know that I am not describing crimes. I am describing the slow, careful process by which a person is reclassified. From family to inconvenience. From sister to obstacle. The last time I saw her before the phone call was Thanksgiving. She sat across from me at my parents' table in Macon and announced that our parents had agreed to invest in her new marketing consultancy. She called it an investment. My parents called it a gift. The number, offered casually between the sweet potatoes and the rolls, was $50,000. My mother looked at me once. Just once. I helped clear the dishes 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. I visited my parents on a Saturday while they were attending my cousin's baby shower in Savannah. They had asked me to watch the dog, a slow, elderly beagle named Russell who spent most of his time on a heating pad by the back door. I let Russell outside and stood in the kitchen drinking coffee, and then I walked into my father's office. I was not snooping. That is not the right word for what I did. I was a lawyer looking at documents that were, technically, in a shared family space. I was a daughter trying to understand something that she had felt but never been able to prove. My father kept his financial records in a set of manila folders in the bottom drawer of his desk, organized by year, the way men of his generation organize things that feel important. He did not have a password on his filing cabinet. He did not think anyone would look. I photographed every document relevant to Danielle over the past 8 years. Bank transfers. A personal loan agreement handwritten, never filed, never repaid. A letter from Danielle dated 4 years ago requesting $12,000 for what she described as temporary cash flow issues. A second letter, 2 years after that, for $18,500 to cover a business debt she described as basically resolved. I sat in my father's desk chair and kept my hands flat on the surface of the desk so they would stay still. The total, across all transfers and informal loans, was $147,000. None of it had been repaid. None of it had been disclosed to me. I photographed everything. I put the folders back exactly as I found them, in the same order, with the same slight tilt on the top folder that I had noticed when I opened the drawer. I walked back to the kitchen and refilled my coffee. Russell scratched at the back door to come in. I let him in and sat on the kitchen floor with him for a while. He put his head in my lap. I did not cry. I had known. That is the thing about finally seeing proof of something you have always known. It does not feel like a revelation. It feels like a door finally opening into a room you have been standing outside of for years. I did not tell anyone immediately. In family law, you learn that the moment of disclosure is a weapon, and weapons are most effective when you choose the moment rather than the moment choosing you. I had seen too many clients storm into confrontations with nothing but rage and walk out with nothing but legal fees. I called an estate planning attorney named Miriam Osei, whom I had met at a conference in Charlotte and whose judgment I trusted completely. I described the situation without naming anyone. Miriam listened without interrupting, which is itself a professional skill not everyone has. She asked 3 questions. She told me to get everything in writing, to document the chain of custody of every photograph, and to wait. I did all 3 over the next 11 months. I built a file. Not to destroy anyone. To understand what had happened and to protect what remained, my relationship with my parents, my own financial stability, my sense of what was real. I want to say something to anyone watching this who has ever felt, in their family, that money was being moved around them in ways they were not told about. Get curious before you get angry. Anger makes you visible. Curiosity makes you precise. The truth almost always lives in the paper. I also had one conversation once, carefully, with a woman named Patricia who lived 3 houses down from my parents and who had known our family for 20 years. I did not ask her anything directly. I mentioned that I was worried about my parents' finances. Patricia looked at me for a moment and said, "Your sister comes by quite a bit." Then she went inside to get her watering can. That was all she said. She did not say it as gossip. She said it the way a person gives directions plainly, "Because you seem to need them." I filed everything. I waited. The weeks before I called Danielle back were the quietest of my adult life. I cooked more than usual. I made a pot of white bean soup on a Sunday that I ate from for 4 days. I reorganized my bookshelves by color, which I had been meaning to do for 2 years, and then reorganized them back by author because color looked nice but was functionally useless. I called my mother twice that week, once to talk about nothing, once to ask if she was sleeping well. She said she was fine. She sounded the way she sounds when she is not fine but has decided not to be a problem about it. My father and I talked about the Braves, about Russell's latest vet appointment, about a documentary he had watched about the construction of the Panama Canal. My father is a quiet man who expresses love through shared information. I let him tell me about the Panama Canal for 20 minutes. It was a good 20 minutes. Danielle, in those weeks, posted photos from a dinner at a restaurant in Buckhead. She looked beautiful. She was laughing. She had no idea the night before I made the call. I took the brooch from the ceramic dish on my dresser and held it for a moment. The woman in profile, pale and steady, the same face it had always been. I put it in my jacket pocket. I called Danielle on Friday morning at 9, which meant I had slept on it, which meant she would read it as consideration rather than strategy. One told her I would like to have a conversation in person before I gave her an answer. I suggested Sunday at my parents' house, since we were both coming down for my mother's birthday. I said I thought it would be nice to have the family together. She agreed without hesitation. She was still confident, I could tell. She believed the answer was going to be yes. On Sunday I arrived first. I had called my parents that morning and asked if we could talk before Danielle arrived. I sat at the kitchen table with Roland and Cynthia Voss, and I opened my laptop. I did not raise my voice. I showed them the photographs of their own documents and I walked through the numbers the way I walk through evidence in a deposition, methodically, without commentary, date by date. My father sat very still. My mother pressed her fingers to her mouth. I told them I was not angry. I told them it was their money and their right. I told them that I needed them to understand what the full picture looked like. Danielle arrived at 11:15. She came through the front door the way she always does, with noise and brightness, calling out hello before she had even closed the door behind her. She walked into the kitchen and saw all three of us at the table. She saw the laptop. She saw my father's face. She sat down. What is this? She said. Not a question. A recalibration. I told her it was a conversation about the $50,000 she had asked me for. I don't understand why that requires a family meeting, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands, folded on the table, had gone white at the knuckles. I showed her the file. Bank transfer records, the handwritten loan agreement, her own letters, her own words, dated and photographed. She said the loans were gifts. My parents said nothing. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth again. She said the transfers were taken out of context. I asked her which context would make $147,000 with no repayment less relevant. She said I was making this about money when it was really about jealousy. That I had always resented her. That I had always wanted to be the favorite. I waited until she finished. The refrigerator hissed. The clock above the stove ticked twice. Danielle's hands went completely still. I said, you told me at Thanksgiving that our parents had agreed to help you because you take care of things. Do you remember that? She said yes. Then help them. Pay them back. She looked at my parents. My father was studying the table. My mother met Danielle's eyes and then looked away. That was all, just that small turn of the head. It was the quietest verdict I have ever witnessed. Danielle stood up. She said she needed some air. She left through the back door. We heard her car in the driveway. 5 minutes later the room was quiet. My father reached over and closed my laptop. He said we didn't know. It all added up to that. I believed him. My parents hired Miriam Osei 3 weeks later to restructure their estate documents. They were not angry. They were, I think, relieved in the way that people are relieved when a thing they have half known for years is finally said plainly. Danielle signed a repayment agreement on March 4th. The total, with a modest interest rate that Miriam suggested and my parents agreed to, came to $153,400. It is being repaid in monthly installments of $1,200, which will take just over 10 years. My parents did not enjoy this. They are not people who like conflict or legal language applied to family matters. But they signed. The $50,000 Danielle had asked me for was never discussed again. She did not press it. I suspect she understood that the conversation had permanently altered the terrain. She and I have not spoken since that Sunday in Macon. I do not know if that will change. I do not spend much time predicting it. My parents call more now. Not about anything in particular. My father about documentaries, my mother about recipes and small observations about her neighbors. I think they are recalibrating something. I think they are learning, late, that attention can be distributed differently. I cleaned out my dresser last month and found the ceramic dish where I keep the brooch. I picked it up the way I always do. That same reflex, that same reaching for the solid small thing. The woman in profile looked exactly the same as she always has, pale and steady. Unbothered, I put it back in the dish. I went to make breakfast. It meant something different than it used to. Not better, not worse. More settled, like a word you have spent years pronouncing incorrectly, and then one day you hear it said right and it just sits there, finally in its place. I did not set out to investigate my family. I set out to understand one phone call. What I found was not a story of cruelty, exactly. It was a story about assumptions about who in a family is expected to manage on their own, who is expected to ask for help, and what happens when both of those expectations run for 30 years without ever being examined. My grandmother Iris worked as a seamstress. She raised 4 children in a house with 1 bathroom in Albany, Georgia, and she never asked anyone for anything that she was not prepared to give back. She left me a brooch worth nothing and everything. She would not have been surprised by any of this. She was not a woman who was easily surprised if any part of this story felt familiar to you, if you recognized something in the numbers, in the silence, in the Sunday phone calls that stopped without explanation. Then you already know what I mean. You do not have to make noise to matter. You just have to be prepared if this story stayed with you. Consider sharing it. There is someone in your life who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, there is a quiet little button right there that costs you nothing and keeps stories like this one coming. Thank you for listening.